a disc today. And I said, what? He said, I saw a disc today. And I said, you went up to Area 51? He said, yeah. And I said, then what are you doing here? I said, they're probably following you. Why don't you find out what's going on and then come back and tell me? He says, no, John, you've taken so much flack over this stuff. I want to tell you that I saw it and it's real. And that's how the whole thing started.
Oh, my God. How did he describe the craft to you?
He said that he walked in the hangar. They let him in. He's always had two guards, one on each side. They let him through the hangar door, or the hangar door was open. And he said he walked by it and he saw an American flag. And he thought, well, this explains it. This is just stuff that we have. And he said he put his hand on the disc, and he said it felt cool to the touch. And he said only later did he realize, no, this can't be ours, because when they gave him access to the inside, the chairs and everything were, for people that were like 3 feet tall. He said this is nothing that we could fit in.
That had to have been quite a sight for him.
It was, and it was quite an experience for me. I'll never forget those 2 years. They were the most exciting in my life. I wouldn't trade them for anything. I never thought in a million years when I started to get into this UFO business, because, you just can't get any information. I never thought I'd get, that close to what was really going on.
And at that point, you got to know our friend George Knapp, who is doing some fill-in hosting for us. I did an interview with George. John was several months ago, and I said, you know what, George, I'd like you to fill in for us once in a while. And he did one show for us, did a great job. And because he is such an expert at what he does, he's a perfect mix for us as a team.
Absolutely. And how George Knapp got in it was I won't go into it. There was 3 times that we went up to the test site with Bob to watch the saucers. The first one was May 22nd, 89. Then the next one was a week later. That was the one that George went and filmed. And then the last one was April 6th, a week after that. And that's when I went up with Bob, his wife's sister, and Gene Huff. And that's when security caught us. And the next day, they hauled him up to Indian Springs, which is the head of all security for the Nevada test site. And they said, now, Bob, when we gave you this clearance and showed you the flying saucers, it didn't mean you were supposed to tell all your friends about it. Now, do you want to work here or not? And he was noncommittal at that meeting, but a few days later, he decided not to go back. And the reason he told me is because the last few trips, when he went up on the 737 there, loading at the terminal, and the terminal used to be over there on Sunset, he said, John, I could remember getting on the airplane, and I could remember getting off it, but I couldn't remember anything I did up there, and he said I didn't want to work under those conditions.
Yeah, never again.
So coincidentally, about that time was on Sunday, I had done a show with George Knapp called On the Record, and George called that evening. He said, John, we have had thousands of phone calls. What can I do for an encore? And I said, well, let me make a call. So I called Bob, and this time he had decided to quit. And I said, do you want to go and do the George Knapp news tomorrow night? And he said, yeah, as long as they don't show my face. So that famous interview of Bob was done in my driveway against the sun, so they couldn't see his face.
And that was a dramatic documentary, that whole program.
Yeah, and then the next night, George had Bob Stoldow come up. Bob was the head of Channel 8, and we sat around the table, and Bob, asked us a bunch of questions, and George wanted to do, a long 6-part series, and Stoldow didn't want to go with it without being convinced. And after he talked with Bob and found out the whole story, he told George, go ahead, and that's where the 6-part series came from.
You've touched a lot of lives and careers in this field. Lots of them. Apollo 1, of course, January 27th, 1967, horrible tragedy when a flash fire occurred in the command module, killing what we always thought then, John, were those 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom and Ed White and Roger Chaffee. But you say there was a 4th. Was he... the capsule didn't have room for 4. Whereabouts would he have been?
Let me quote from the book Apollo, The Race to the Moon by Charles Murray and Catherine Bly Cox.
Okay.
It's an interview with Joe Shea. Joe was the head of ASPO, which was the Apollo Space Program Office. And Joe is lamenting about the fire and not being there and so on and so on. And page 223 says, for Joe Shea's the accident serenades achieved a dimension of tragedy. Consider the paradox in Shea's narrow escape when only a technical hitch kept him from being in the spacecraft during the fire. So lucky for him, it first seems, that they couldn't hook up the headset in time. So morbid of him, it first seems, to wish occasionally that he had been in the spacecraft after all. And yet if Shea had been in the spacecraft, he would have been sitting in the bay, beneath the astronaut couches, down by the ECU, and the netting that probably first caught the fire. Now, I've got all kinds of books and drawings on Apollo, and there was not plenty of room, but they used to have a fourth guy down there that would, monitor and, check out things and, be, for various reasons during these practice countdown tests. So there certainly was room there.
Do your sources tell you that there was a fourth person there?
My source is deceased now. He was, George, a true insider. And he didn't tell me much, but he did tell me a few things. And one of them was, he said there was a fourth guy in that fire. He said I was brought in immediately afterwards. He said I went up to level 8, and he said the National Security Agency had cordoned off the area right after the fire, and they spent 45 minutes removing that body, and then they let NASA go in there and remove the rest of the bodies. And so I thought that's pretty interesting. So I started doing research, and just one little thing after the other points to, yep, by George, there certainly was one. Now, George, this happened in 1967. You figure there might have been 30, maybe 35 controllers in that room. They were all between maybe 25 and 35 years old, maybe some older. They're between 70 and 75 now. Some of them are still alive. So if they're listening to the program, I would appreciate it if you call in and say, you don't have to identify yourself, just say, yes, the story is true. I can't tell you any more than that, but there was a fourth guy. And if they want to do this, they can give me the first letter of the last name of the guy, which I know, and of course I'm not going to reveal it, but if they'll just give me the first letter of the last name of the guy, then we'll know that guy was there.
Okay. Well, now, if he was there and they're covering it up, again, why would they do that? Why don't they simply say, well, we had 3 astronauts
because they would
and a fourth?
They would have had to explain who he was, and they would have had to explain who he was, what his background was, and he was part of the Secret Astronaut Corps, and that would have exposed the Secret Astronaut Corps. And they couldn't afford, under any circumstances, to expose the Secret Astronaut Corps.
Tell us why. Why the Secret Astronaut Corps?
Because, George, we have many things going on. As I told you, we've been going back and forth to the moon since 1962. We've been going back and forth to Mars since 1966. We have programs going on that are unbelievable. All the rest of the stuff is cover-up. The shuttle, all this stuff is just, it's cover-up for what is really going on. And as hard as that is to believe, I'm hoping that someday, you're going to find out this is true.
I want to get your thoughts on that, John, when we come back at the top of the hour about what really is going on. He's got some incredible things to say. Also believes that the planets in this solar system inhabited by beings much like us. We'll get John Lear's take on that as well. John doesn't have a website, so I do not have one for you to go and take a look at. He does not have a book to sell. He doesn't have anything to sell here. He's just here to talk about some of the things that he knows that we are sharing with you tonight on